achieving the result is never as good as like what you think achieving the result's gonna feel like. I got to this point where I was like, I remember distinctly, I'll never forget it. I owned a plane, had the biggest house in like all of Los Angeles pretty much. You know what I'm saying? I had like, you know, one of the biggest houses in Vegas, like had every car. I bought a Ferrari, I put like 75 miles on the motherfucker in a year, you know what I'm saying? I had all the chicks, I'm on this 300-foot yacht, 27 models, like cutting throats to bang me. And I'm like, damn, like I was happier before surfing with my buddies, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, damn, this is fucked up.
Call him the king of Instagram, Dan Bilzerian.
Dan Bilzerian.
Dan Bilzerian.
The most major playboy on the planet over here, Dan Bilzerian.
The infamous Instagrammer, Dan Bilzerian.
And all I see on the Instagram comments, like, you're the man, like I wish I, you know, fucking what I had to do to hang out with you, you know, everybody I'd see in the streets would be like, dude, you're the fucking man, you know, all this shit. I should be happy, you know what I mean? I should be happy, like I'm here, like everybody's like wants to be where I'm at. And I got to the end of the earth, like I know I got to the end of this motherfucking road, because like there was like, I couldn't have sex with as many girls as wanted to have sex with me, so there's no further you can go. I've definitely had some epiphanies. One of them was...
Today, we have the opportunity to sit down with Dan Bilzerian. Worth hundreds of millions of dollars, Dan is a successful entrepreneur, businessman, and poker player. He rose to fame in the mid-2010s for broadcasting his lavish lifestyle on Instagram, which included having sex with thousands of women. For obvious reasons, Dan has become one of the world's most polarizing figures. Some people are offended by his outward acts of hedonism, but others are drawn to it. Millions of men around the world dream of living a life like Dan's, and thousands of women have fought for the chance to be one of Dan's girlfriends. Most recently, Dan released a memoir that gave a behind-the-scenes look into his life. In this episode, we're going to dig into some of the surprising realizations he's had, specifically around the pursuit of pleasure, sex, and money. And without further ado, Dan Bilzerian.
Yeah, I think, the tagline for our company is we're all searching for something. And I couldn't help but think of that phrase when I was reading your book. Just so many different iterations of your life. And I think that you've just been on this like massive journey. And I think you've experienced things that people dream of experiencing, but 99% probably won't. And not just with women, but like the Navy SEALs, like even just little stories like, racing a Ford against Ferrari.
It's kind of like the bucket list of like all the teenagers, you know?
Yeah.
Wow.
Being a police officer. So all these different things. But then I think there was like the book kind of revealed that there's like so much more to you than what people see on social media, which I know you've heard that before, but, and then you wrote on page 5, I thought it was remarkable. You wrote like, I am no hero. And I just felt like in reading the book, it was such like a honest, like contemplative reflection of your life.
I tried to tell like if somebody found my diary, you know what I mean? Like that I didn't want them to read.
Yeah.
That was kind of, because I feel like, I don't know, it would have been easy to brag and like talk about all the great shit, but I think if you don't temper it with the, the insecurities and things that drove you, because I think like you look behind a lot of great guys, like for instance, like GSP was over here the other day, watch this fucking guy, sorry about the language, growing up, like UFC champion, arguably one of the best fighters in the world.
Yeah.
And, he like had to deal with bullying and stuff like that. And I think like a lot of times, same thing with David Goggins, the guy that did the forward for the book. Like a lot of these guys, they were able to channel that insecurity, those shitty things into drive to go achieve, beyond what most people would ever achieve, know? So I think it's kind of like, it's an important part of the story.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think there's so many learnings in there that I just think are very valuable for people's lives. And there was certainly like a big interest with your story with our audience. Like the 2 things we posted got like 13 million views and it was like shared 600,000 times. So when you originally kind of reach out and you're talking about like how people could benefit by not pursuing hedonistic goals, I'm excited to like get into that. But I kind of want to take the audience like through your story and kind of almost in some ways follow the format of the book. And so, the one thing that stuck out to me with like your childhood was like people see the life on social media, but like when you go back to the beginning, it could really be like anybody's story. And there was just like a lot of things that I resonated with. And so, yeah, let's talk about that. And, first question, like, tell us kind of about like your relationship with like your family and your dad growing up when you were a kid?
Yeah, I didn't see him too much, and I think, I don't know, like I said in the book, it's kind of hard to like say what was a good thing or a bad thing until like everything's run its course, So I think early on, I kind of resented the lack of attention, but maybe that drove me to, do other things. So it's kind of hard to really say, maybe I had a perfect childhood and then I wouldn't have done as much, or things would have been easier and I wouldn't have been, kind of like driven so hard. I think that's like one of the reasons why, I didn't complete SEAL training, but I was fucking one day prior, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I did it twice. And I think one of the things that really drove me was some of that insecurity and like that, need for validation or approval, or like, if I do this, then people will respect me, or if I do this, then girls will like me, or if I do this, then, my father will think that I'm cool, whatever it was, right? Like for me, those are my things, but like everybody's kind of got their things. And so I don't think a lot of people are honest about like what drives them. And I think that's important. I think it's important to understand that.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I resonated with a lot of that in the book. You have this quote that says, "I imagine the respect people would give me if they saw a SEAL trident on my uniform. I imagined a girl asking me what I did for a living and how cool it would be if I didn't tell her and later found out I thought being a SEAL would solve all my problems." And I imagined you in the SEAL training just taking a beating, day after day. And you're just, you talk at like different points about like running on like 13-mile days. And you're like doing it on these broken legs and you're freezing cold. And it's just this torturous event. And you're keeping this quote in your head, that desire, that clarity for the optics almost,
Yeah, I think they asked me when I was going through SEAL training why I wanted to be a Navy SEAL, and I told them that because I wanted to brag about it.
It's really honest.
Yeah, and the officer that I told it to, I think he was like, I don't know, I don't think he was too impressed with that, but maybe it's because it was true for him too. He didn't want to admit that, but I don't know. I guess. It was, it was like one of those things. I think when you're a kid, you imagine like, okay, if I do this, then this, right? Like, and so I looked at a lot of the guys that quit or that didn't make it or whatever, and it didn't really usually have to do with how they looked or how tough they were or whatever. Like what I felt like was kind of like the similar trait that the guys that made it through had was that like, they just wanted it really bad. You know what I mean? Like they just really, really wanted it. And so I think counter to what most people might think, like probably a lot of the guys that made it through weren't necessarily like the toughest guys. They might have been like the most insecure guys, So now you got like a bunch of, previously insecure guys with this like trident under the chest, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like some hot chicks. Like when guys treat them really good and they don't feel deep down that like they're that great, then they don't respect the guys, And I think a lot of hot chicks respond better to a guy treating them like shit because of that, because like deep down they don't have that, I guess, real confidence. So they look at this guy, if they truly believe they're like down here and a guy treats them really well, then that guy must be beneath them, right? So that puts him, down here. So I think, with a lot of the Navy SEALs, maybe like deep down, some of these guys don't think they're really that badass. And so, you got like a similar thing going on maybe.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a parallel with that, like also with women, like in your childhood as well. There was this quote where you said, I was pretty shy, like most 17-year-olds, I was scared of talking to hot girls. The fear wasn't actually of speaking to them, but of being rejected by them. And so like, can you like take us through like what your mindset was like at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I just, I didn't want to be embarrassed. I didn't want to be rejected. And I think that's, pretty common thread with young guys, but most don't want to admit that, but it is what it is. And I think it's gotten worse now. Like, I think guys nowadays are like just giving up, you know what I mean? Like back when I was younger, like there's guys that didn't, talk to that many girls, but like they tried sometimes. I feel like now you've got like a whole new generation of guy that just like has quit, just doesn't even try.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It like, I was thinking about it as you were talking. You're kind of going from this invalidating environment in your early life. You just keep going, and then you get into the SEALs, and this kind of theme dawned on me because then in SEALs, you're done, and you're standing there. You're like, I think you're, what is 16 of how many guys?
17 out of 107 or something, or 120. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you say this quote, and I think it was, I think I've got it here, but I'd accomplished the unimaginable, but it felt like nobody cared, like winning the lottery only to find out you're the last person on earth. Of all the pain I endured, and you said this about your CEO, your commanding officer, and
him not acknowledging me was the worst part.
Yeah, not acknowledging you was the worst part, and so you're at that point where you're like, you got past Hell Week, and you feel like you've graduated, you've achieved this massive thing, and now it's just more invalidation. I can't imagine how a moment like that feels.
Yeah, it's weird because you don't realize until like later on, like little small interactions. That's why like I take pictures of everybody that always asks. Like I realize that like little interactions, can make a big difference. I talked about that in there too. Like I did this one scene with Denzel, and he complimented my acting, and I was just like, fuck it. I thought that was so awesome. Yeah, I was a pretty shitty actor, but I did that one scene good. And I was like pretty stoked about that. So that's like, fucking, I'm sure this guy's forgotten, completely about that interaction. But I still remember it, right? So it's like little things. And, that CEO, like, he wasn't probably a bad guy. He just probably didn't remember, didn't give a shit, whatever. But like for me, in my mind, it was like really built up. And I think that happens a lot of times when people meet like a celebrity or somebody that they like really care about, right? So in their mind, that's like a huge fucking deal. So the guys just kind of like fuck off. For him, he doesn't remember it and won't lose sleep over it. But this guy's, might be in fucking therapy. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like little things, have that strong ripple effects. I think you have to like act differently later on when you have, more power.
So you also mentioned earlier in the book about like always wanting to get your father's respect. And so this theme of like respect and approval, like why do you feel like that's so important for you?
I think because I didn't have it, I think when you have like a perceived lack and it's, ingrained in your childhood, it sticks with you for a while. So yeah, it probably drove me with the social media stuff a bit, lack of attention. Well, I got a lot of fucking attention there. So
there was this one guy that kind of stuck out in your childhood, Ernie. Your dad, your next door neighbor. So there was like kind of a couple of things that you looked at that you wanted from him, like money, obviously, and women. And you wrote that, he was proof that money buys happiness.
At the time, that's what I thought. I was like, man, this guy's got it all. He's got the hot chicks, he's got the nice watch, the cars. And like our house is way bigger than his, but my dad didn't have any of the cool shit. So I was just like, I'd rather be this guy. So I think like, I don't know, man, it's funny because like if you look back at like a lot of the stuff, I definitely think there was like a trickle out effect, or there was, some like, these little things had kind of like a strong impact later. So
yeah.
That was definitely one of them because I looked at that guy like he was the man.
Yeah.
But he also gave you a lot of attention, right? Like he would take you out and you'd have fun, but you also witnessed the attention that he was getting.
Well, from girls.
I didn't
give a shit about the guy stuff, but I was like, the hot chicks, giving this guy attention. So to me, that was just like, wow,
Yeah.
And I remember going to a strip club and it was like, obviously because he's rich and throwing around money, but like he had a bunch of girls, vying for his attention. And I was just like, wow, like what would that be like? Imagine if I like walked into school with two of these hot chicks, everybody would respect me then.
Like every young guy out there.
Yeah. So, I mean, you got out of the SEALs, there was Ernie that was a figure, and then you were in college. And so, there's this public perception that you're a trust fund baby, but that's not true. I think you showed the stuff in the book that.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I can't even really be that mad about it because I kind of like leveraged that to get into the poker game. So, and I also didn't deny it, and I did technically have a trust fund. It just like didn't kick in until way later, and it wasn't that much.
Yeah, you lost all of it.
Yeah, well, pretty much. I mean, I think I got cashed out like $1 million or $2 million. It was just like, but I'd bought a jet like 4 or 5 years prior, right? So it's like, but yeah. You got to kind of have like a story, otherwise these guys aren't going to want to play with you. So for me, that trust fund thing did help my story. So like I said, I can't really be mad at it,
Yeah, I mean, that was part of like the premise of the book, like the whole setup thing.
Yeah.
And like you use that to your advantage. So like there was this one moment, like kind of crazy moment in college. And I don't know if I'm reading this right, but like kind of seemed like you were like kind of living by the seat of your pants, and like you made $187,000 in like a few days. And so
No, it was over a 3-week period.
over a 3-week period.
Well, yeah. So I sold all. I was like beyond broke. Like I was like in debt, and my dad wouldn't give me any money. My dad wouldn't give me any money. My brother wouldn't give me any money. And I sold 3 of my guns. And I remember that was like when it was like real. I was like, oh shit, like I'm fucking hawking my guns. You know, this is back when you could like sell them in a parking lot.
yeah.
I was like literally selling like 3 of my guns in the parking lot. And those are kind of like my prized possessions. So I was like, man, this is rock bottom. And then I went and stayed at this like shitty hotel, and I went on this gambling boat, and I was playing like 18 hours a day. I'd like go play on this gambling boat, come back, sleep, and then go back to the boat. And it was like me and this Asian kid were like, you know, battling every day. And I made 10 grand out of $750, and we both bought like one-way tickets to Vegas, kind of like rounders. And we were just like, all right, he went broke, and I carried him for a little bit, and then sent him home, and I did well. I made $187,000, came back, like bought a Range Rover, and it was just different after that, you know?
Has your like wealth literally went up ever since then, and since that moment?
Well, yeah, pretty much. There was like a few like setbacks, but yeah, it was pretty much, you know, it's been like that. I think maybe like 2010 or 11, I was kind of like having some, like a little bit of a shitty run. And then everything changed when I started playing like the really high stakes LA games, because those guys were super bad. Like LA and New York, I was going between those places. And then when I got into play Alec Heads Up, then it was just like everything was different. I mean, I was beating this guy for like, you know, millions of dollars in a day. It was crazy.
That's insane. Yeah, so it seems like at least initially, like you built most of your wealth through poker. Is that?
Yeah.
That's correct.
I mean, yeah, almost all of it. And then it was like a little bit through gambling stuff, like staking other people, or like, you know, having a sports betting account where somebody else like put in the money, did the picks, and I got 30%, like shit. Like there was like, you know, all sorts of side hustles, betting on car races, like whatever. But like, yeah, it was like gambling, pretty much all gambling.
Yeah, it seems like, you know, we were talking about this, the whole idea of like these kind of wild like extremes. And like, I was just reading and I was like, I can't imagine first like playing $10 million hands, but like even tipping someone like $300,000, which is like more than like the vice president's like salary.
Yeah, no, you just like lose sight of money. It's almost impossible. I mean, the blinds were 10,000, 25,000, you know, those were just like the blinds, you know, so the opening raise is 100 grand. It's like, you just, I don't know, if the minimum to pay to see 3 cards, 100 grand, you know what I mean? You just kind of like start losing sight of money. And it was funny when he actually brought back the reality of it, is when he started betting in cars, or like, you know, I raise you a Learjet, or I bet a Bugatti, you know, he started saying stupid shit like that, but it actually did like mess with my head, because you're visualizing,
like
you're
objects.
like, you're like, oh shit, like this, I got to call a Ferrari. You know, he was like, I don't know, it's kind of, it was weird. And the casinos are genius in this. They, you know, they make this little plastic chip, and it's worth $100,000, right? And so it's like, it's so easy to just like flick that in. And I noticed this back in the day when they used to let us play with cash, and like you would have these bricks, and when a motherfucker would throw in a brick of, you know, 50,000 or 100,000, it was like, and you heard the thud,
It would do something.
it was like shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like versus like you flick in one little plastic chip and it's worth the same money, right? But the visual of like a brick of cash hitting the table is kind of like, so it's almost like, you know, you'd almost use that a little bit, but then there was a counter. It was like, oh, okay, is he betting this cash because he's bluffing?
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean? Does he not want me to call? You know what I mean? So you had to kind of like level that. But yeah, it was interesting.
Is that an intimidation tactic, by the way? Is it like something that somebody will do maybe to throw another player off?
Well, there's levels, right? There's levels to it. There's like, you know, the first level of it is like, oh, I'm strong, I want to act weak, or, you know, I'm weak, I want to act strong. And then the second level out of it is like, you know, I'm weak, so I'm going to act weak, right? It's kind of like what level you're on with him. Like, what does he think that I think that he has? What does he think that I think that he thinks that I, you know what I'm saying? Like, you start doing the iterations of that. And then also, like, your betting is telling a story too, right? Like, if you check raise a guy on the flop, you're saying, like, I have a strong hand, or I have a big draw, or like, you know what I'm saying? Whatever that action is indicating. And then it's like, are you going to continue to tell that story? Okay, the flush card hit. Now you're bombing again. It's like, okay, you're representing a flush. Now the board pairs and you bomb again. It's like, wait, like he bet when the flush card hit. So if he had 3 of a kind, he might not have bet that. And then now the board paired, would he bet a flush if there was a full house? And then when there's incongruencies in the betting patterns with like an inexperienced player, it's like, this guy's just full of shit. He's not really telling a logical story. He's just bombing, right? He's just like trying to buy the pot. It's like, you start, just so it's like knowing the player, knowing how they react. And then, it's a lot of levels, like just the betting, the psychology, how they're acting, the whole thing. So
you ended up writing, I made stupid, ridiculous, crazy amounts of money, but it was always short-lived though, because when I got to what I thought was a peak, I'd see it was only a false summit and realize how much further I had to climb. It made me think of Harvard had this article, one of the, I think, psychologists over there talking about this idea of arrival fallacy. I think he actually coined that term, but just the idea of like when you reach a goal, like it didn't do what you thought it would do. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I feel like achieving the result is never as good as like what you think achieving the result's gonna feel like, right? So like if I were to like plot my life, it would not be like a super fast rise to the top. It would be a slow, steady climb, because like every incremental increase, you're getting like a little bit of happiness, of feeling like you're doing the right thing, you're succeeding, all this stuff. But when you go up too high, and then when you reach that peak, it's like, I've climbed a lot of mountains, like figuratively and not, right? And it's like, if you stop on the way up and it's like you kind of enjoy the view and you're looking around, you're like, okay, this is, this is a better view than it was 5 hours ago, and now we're higher now, or whatever it is, like now we have more money, we're we're doing even better. And it's like, if you appreciate those things, then it's great. It's like, each rung of the ladder. But if you just do what I did, was just like a blind race to the top, and the only focal point was like getting to the top and we have to succeed, it's like you get to the top and it's kind of like it's been built up so much, you get up there and you're like, okay, now I'm at the top, like, what do we do now? It's kind of like there's that impending kind of letdown. I mean, I felt that with the SEAL training. I felt that kind of like after poker sessions sometimes. And
Is it kind of like a moving thing, like a false summit in a way? Like
a little bit.
You get up to the top and then you almost, the second that you get up there, you can envision another top.
And also just like the fact that it doesn't feel as good as you thought, right? So you're like, okay, maybe I need to just keep going, or maybe this is, this idea that it's not enough. And I talk about this a lot, like when it comes to pleasure seeking and like hedonistic things, like there isn't an enough. Like there's never enough money, there's never enough girls, there's never enough power, like whatever you're like chasing, if it's kind of like in that hedonistic, to the biblical sense, sin, whatever, like those things are never going to fulfill you, right? Like that's kind of like a black hole. You can just keep chucking shit in a black hole. That motherfucker's never going to fill up. You know what I mean? Well, that's the same thing with you. Like if your goal is to like achieve these hedonistic things, there's never going to be enough. Like I was having sex with 3 girls a day on average, at least, like every day. And I didn't feel like that was enough. I couldn't even like physically have sex with all the girls that want to have sex with me. And I didn't feel like it was like this crazy weird thing, right? Like I definitely had a sex addiction and whatever. But there was like that feeling like it just wasn't enough. And like, and I got to the end of the earth. Like I know I got to the end of this motherfucking road. Cause like there was like, I couldn't have sex with as many girls as wanted to have sex with me. So there's no further you can go, right? Like that's the definition of excess. And I didn't feel like it was enough. So it's like, I don't think many guys get to the actual end of the road. And, and I would see this with other celebrities too. Like these guys that like had all these girls lined up, whatever, and they were still chasing. They were still like, more.
Yep.
And I saw with the money too, like guys, you look at these fucking guys that got billions of dollars. Like you can't spend this money. Why are you working? Like, why are you spending your life trying to accumulate more money that you can't spend?
Yeah, like what for? Yeah.
What's like it's ego, you know what I mean? It's ego, or it's like, this chase of like I said, man, money is like one of those things where you think it's enough. Like I really believe, and this is like from the bottom of my heart, that if I had $1 million when I was in college, it's like, I'm fucking set.
Why do you think people believe that though? Well,
because I thought, I was like, I'd have a motorcycle, I'd get some chicks, I could have a Beamer. It's like for me at that time, that was it. Like what else is there? Like I got a Beamer, I got a motorcycle, I got chicks, I could go buy what I want, I could have the new shoes, like, and then you get to that level and you're like, okay, well, now maybe I want a Ferrari, or you know what I mean?
It's interesting because you get around a different social culture. You like climb the rung, and then you're around somebody with a Maserati, and suddenly you're thinking you've never had this thought before because you're riding a Subaru Legacy or something, like and you're like, you know what, a Maserati would be really nice, and it's kind of like that false summit, like you're talking about. Like it shifts.
There's always higher, man. It's like
Yeah.
there's always a bigger boat. There's always like this. There's always that, and then it's like, okay, like now, I got to a point where I was like, okay, now I'm not flying commercial anymore. Everywhere we're flying is private. And it's like, now I got to get a jet.
Yeah.
Now this house isn't big enough. You know what I mean? It's like, I got to this point where I was like, I remember distinctly, I'll never forget it. I owned a plane. I had the biggest house in like all of Los Angeles pretty much. You know what I'm saying? I had like, one of the biggest houses in Vegas, like had every car. I bought a Ferrari. I put like 75 miles on the motherfucker in a year. You know what I'm saying? I had all the chicks. I'm on this 300-foot yacht, 27 models, like cutting throats to bang me. And I'm like, damn, like I was happier before surfing with my buddies. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, damn, this is fucked up. I'm like, I got all this stuff. And all I see on the Instagram comments, like, you're the man. Like, I wish fucking what I'd have to do to hang out with you. And everybody I'd see in the streets would be like, dude, you're the fucking man. All this shit. And it's like, I just didn't feel like I had accomplished enough. You know what I mean? Or I didn't feel like it was enough. Or it's just like, I should be happy. You know what I mean? I should be happy. Like, I'm here. Like, everybody's like, wants to be where I'm at. And I'm just like,
I'm wondering with that, like in this quest for validation, do you think that we lose some of our authenticity because we're trying to do what the world tells us to do, what the rest of the world would say, hey, that would be a big thing. But then you're saying,
I think that's
actually
part of the
surfing
social
is-
media stuff too. I think I think social media is like a big cancer. So I think social media has now like pitted us against 8 billion other people.
Yeah.
It's like, you're never going to be good looking enough. You're never going to be rich enough. And not only that, but these motherfuckers are photoshopping their shit on top of it. So it's like, this dude's 6% body fat and he's photoshopping his shoulders to be big and he's already got the best genetics. Like, you know what I mean? It's crazy. So like, not only are you seeing like the best of the best at their angle at the best time, right after they lifted, right after they fasted, all this shit, right? But on top of that, they're photoshopping it too. So it's like, it creates kind of like this crazy reality of like what people expect. You see this with women a lot. Like, women think, like, you'll see a chick that's like a pretty average chick and she'll be like, oh, I want a guy that's, makes $1 million a year, that's 6 foot, that's got an 8-inch dick, that's this, that's that, that's funny, that's this, it's like, yeah, that's a strong lift. Like, how many people do you think are going to fit that description? Why do you think you deserve that? So it's just like a weird thing, but I think guys have fallen into it. I think girls have fallen into it. And I think you get addicted to like this dopamine hit. I mean, they've proven it. It's like, this is, intermittent positive reinforcement. It's no different than gambling or fucking any of this other stuff. Like, you see it. It's like, it works. It's a technology. I mean, they implement it because it works. And you see it, lab rats have done studies, right? So when you have this and you have it at the tip of your fingertips, I mean, I think this causes anxiety. I think it causes like so many problems. You're getting this like massive stimulus and it's at your fingertips all the time. And then you put the phone down, having a conversation with your buddies or just chilling, and it's like, I'm not, you know what I mean? Like, you need all this stimulus. You're used to all this stimulus, and it's like, it's hard to relax because like your mind is going,
One of the more like absurd things that I thought you said was that the whole like working at Walmart thing, like the whole idea of like spending a few months to kind of like reset and like live on a budget and like work at, like where is that coming from for you?
Well, it's a reset. It's, it's like, when I went in boot camp, I mean, I grew up in like a 44,000 square foot house. And then I went and lived in a barracks with like 60 or 80 people in the size of my indoor basketball court, you know what I mean? Just scrubbing toilets and shitters with the toothbrush, right? It's like, you do that. And then after like 3 or 4 months of that, I get out and I'm just like, I'm grateful of 8 hours of sleep. I'm like, I go to Outback Steakhouse and it's like, oh my God, you know what I mean? There's nothing better. And it's just, it's a perspective shift. And so if you go through something like I always say, like within like 2 or 3 months and at a maximum 6 months, you get used to whatever conditions you're in. I don't care if it's prison. I don't care if it's winning the lottery, like whatever it is. And then when you reestablish that baseline, if your baseline is like here, it can only go up. You know what I mean? There's a lot of like pleasure spikes along the way. A lot of like little things will give you like ticks, right? But if you're here, it's kind of like, you're probably only going to be falling. So I think it's important to have a reset if you can. And then, like I said, if you can reset down here and slowly like progress, you know, that progression brings the happiness.
It almost makes me feel like, I mean, we live in New York and see homeless people all the time. And sometimes you stop and talk to them and they're like the most grateful, like humble people. of like just like anything that they get. It's like, and it kind of makes me think of what you're talking about, this like truth or value that like they literally have nothing, and so like all they have to do is go, and it's almost like an idea of like living with gratitude.
Yeah, every time I like go biking, I bike through kind of like the storm drain, the sewer thing or whatever, the city, and there's a bunch of bums and shit there. So I bring a gun and I bring like a few $1,000s and I give them money or whatever. And it's like, it's crazy. Like sometimes, you hand one of these guys like a couple $100 and they'll just be like so happy. Then you give them like $500 and then so it's like, I don't know, it's fun to do. And it's like a small amount of money versus like, if you were gambling, that wouldn't even be like a small, you know what I'm saying? Like, so you look at like how you throw it away and it would have no impact. You go out to dinner and spend $3,000 and like whatever, like I would have been just as happy if I went to In-N-Out, or if you give it to like some bum and it's like changes the next month of his life. So I don't know, like I do that. It's kind of fun.
Has traveling or philanthropy or anything like that? Cause like I went over to West Africa like not too long ago, and I came back and it was like the most refreshing trip of my life because of what you were saying. It wasn't really refreshing because the trip was brutal. There were mosquitoes everywhere. It was like 100+ degrees. It's super humid and we're eating awful food, having a terrible time. You think this would not be refreshing whatsoever. But the contrast, I realized I was coming back to the real vacation. My life had been the vacation and it just gave me this context. Yeah. Like when you've talked about like how you've served with Hurricane Harvey and those kinds of things. Coming back from those experiences, do you feel this kind of context for your life? Like,
yeah, I mean, Hurricane Harvey was shitty, man. We like flew out there and it's funny. We flew out there with like, in my mind, I had this, grand plan of like what I was going to do. And then we got there and it's like, we couldn't really do too much initially. Like my buddy like arranged a helicopter. And so we were like, flying in some stuff, but like we didn't really have that much of an impact. And at the time, it was when I was doing my my reserve cop thing or whatever. So I put my badge on, and now all of a sudden I could go like work with the Coast Guard. I could do this, I could do that, and like people were like, oh yeah, come on in. And so I was like able to actually do something. But when it shifted was when my buddy gave me a 5-ton truck. It was like a deuce and a half and a 5-ton, and so we were able to like drive into these flooded neighborhoods, fill up the thing, and like drive all these people out, and there's fucking chainsaw, and you're cutting down trees, and like I drove over a car in an accident. Like it was pretty crazy, We had 2 cops in the back, and it felt good. Like you're like literally helping people out of like a crazy situation. We were sweating our asses off, and I didn't get to my food, and I didn't get to work out. And like, so for me, I was like in this like, I lived my life in such a comfort bubble where like my chefs gave me food every 3 hours. I could hit the gym when I wanted. I'm in AC. Like I wasn't really like. And now I'm sweating my ass off. We got no AC in this truck, and I'm like, getting bitten by flies, and we're driving through swamps with snakes and bullshit and pulling people out. It was like a whole thing. And yeah, after that, when I came home, I was like, damn, like I was in my bed and I was like comfortable and, I had my food and my meals, and I could hit the gym when I wanted. It's sometimes like you don't realize how many things that you have. I mean, I'm like a perfect example of this shit. I take almost my whole life for granted now. I mean, it sucks. So I shouldn't do it, but I mean, at least I'm honest about it, right? Like I don't appreciate almost anything. And so like when you put yourself in a shitty situation and then you come back, then you like, whether you want to or not, you start appreciating a lot of stuff. And that's honestly like, look, when you have basic needs met, you're doing good. You're better than like most of the population, but we forget that because most people live like such a comfortable life that you just take so many things for granted, like not having to walk outside and take a shit at night in an outhouse when it's 30 degrees. You know what I'm saying? Like stuff that like for thousands of years people have been doing, right? Like just having basic sanitation. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that. And one of like the, happiness hacks is just like being grateful for stuff that you have. And I think an easy way to do that is, like the Walmart example where you just reset and you live like a shitty life for a while and then you come back. And I think probably construction. I don't think I'm going to do Walmart, but like construction would be probably
kind of related to the money thing. So there's a chapter in your book that's called Better to Give Than Receive. I don't know if you know that, but like those words like kind of originate straight from the mouth of Jesus. And so there was like some really incredible stories in there that people don't hear about. And so I kind of wanted to like ask you, like, what have you learned about like that virtue of like, it's better to give than receive?
I mean, it's a fact, man. I remember, like I said in the book, I remember my dad used to tell me that as a kid. And I was like, well, that's great because you just give me a bunch of shit and I'll be happy and you'll be happy. You can just keep giving and I'll receive and everybody wins, So like, I wouldn't have believed it. But I think when you start actually, like for me, I've given like tons of money. Like I've, written like, 7-figure checks to charities and stuff like, or 6-figure to charities and stuff like that, and I got nothing out of it. Like it was like, okay, like we're probably having an impact, but we don't know. But like if I just like hand, like I said, a bum $1,000, like it's like, I feel way more from that than if I were to send 100,000 to charity. Probably the 100,000 I sent to charity have a bigger impact. But like for me, it was always just like, it was probably like a more selfish thing. Like I did a lot of this stuff because it made me really happy. It was like one of the few things that like I got happy. Like I was honestly doing a lot of the stuff for myself.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not gonna like act virtuous. Like when I would do things for people, it would like bring me out like,
something for you.
Yeah. And that's why I was doing it.
Selfish.
Yeah. I'm no saint, trust me, buddy. So like, but I would help my grandmother out and she would get super happy. I bought her a Cadillac and she was so happy, got her a TV and she was so, what I mean? So, but that made me happy because she was stoked. And so, and I would like hide money on her thing and she would find it, what I mean? Just like little stuff. But I was stoked because she was stoked. If she didn't give a shit, then it probably wouldn't have given me any happiness. So for me, like, I've found that the stuff that I enjoy doing is the stuff where I get to see a direct impact on somebody else. Because like I said, I do it for selfish reasons. Yeah. So, I like to see the happiness and then I get, the pleasure spike of the happiness or whatever comes from that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think so. Because like I said, I bought myself a bunch of shit and I could care less. Like I got the Ferrari and I thought I was gonna be happy for at least a day. I didn't give a shit.
Yeah, I think that most people live obviously with the opposite mindset. And you kind of wrote, you said no amount of talking could have like convinced me otherwise. And I think,
well, it's not true initially. When I bought my first Ferrari, I was happy for a while.
Definitely.
Like, you know what I mean? When I hooked up with the first hot chick, I was like stoked. You know what I'm saying? So like, but I just think that it does work. I'm not telling people that like this stuff won't give you pleasure spikes. I'm not saying that. It for sure will. If you've never had a Ferrari and you buy a Ferrari, you will be happy for a period of time. There's no two ways about it unless you don't like cars or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But like, I think that it's fleeting and it's also, like not as much as you expect it to be.
Yeah.
So I think, and I also think it's like how hard it was for you to get that, because like later, for me to buy a Ferrari tomorrow, I could, flip a quarter and go get the thing, right? So, I'd tell somebody to get it and it would appear and I would drive it, right? But before, when I had to like slave my ass off and like go through a lot of stress, and I had to like really like earn that money, and I knew what it took to get that money, then that kind of like manifestation in a car represented that effort that I had to put in. So I looked at like, there better not be a scratch on this motherfucker kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Like it was like, I really valued it. And so I think that has something to do with it. So I think a lot of these guys that are like, whatever, $50,000 a year guys, normal human beings, the thought of having a Ferrari is like, they can't get beyond that because for them, it literally would be happiness for a period, not for, not forever, but for a period, it definitely, or pleasure, whatever you want to call it. But then what do they do in a year? See, because now they're really stoked, right? But where do you go? That's the thing about pleasure is like, for happiness, it's kind of like happiness kind of just like fades and it's whatever. Like when I give somebody, like when I'm driving and I'm handing out money or I'm doing shit or whatever, like I'm stoked. And then it's like, but I'm not really like depressed after. I'm like, oh damn, I don't have any money to give this next guy. You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, like I'm happy, he's happy. That stays with me for a while. But when you buy it, or it's more like pleasure, hedonistic things, then I feel like there is more of like, kind of like a drug where there's that come down,
Yeah. How much money are you worth today?
Guess it depends on what my company sells for. I mean, hopefully like 350-ish, I don't know. Probably.
Million?
Yeah.
350. Okay, so, we're talking about pleasure and happiness. So like hypothetically, let's just say, because you feel like you could live a happy and satisfied life if like that money went completely away tomorrow?
Not initially. Like initially I'd be pretty bummed and it would definitely be a shitty day. It's kind of like, that's the thing about these kids that grow up with money is like, they have to drop off. You know what I'm saying? Like if your standard of living is like here, I mean, you can either just like maintain or you're going down. And so I always say like, it's way worse to get rich and then lose the money than to like never have it.
Yeah.
So I think because I've had it for a while, it would be pretty shitty not to have it. Like I haven't flown commercial in 12 years. I haven't like done laundry, or you don't even made a bed, or like any of the stuff that like, you know, it's probably good to do, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think, I don't know. I mean, I'd probably be miserable for a little while, and then I'd probably actually be happier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd probably like ground out, and I'd be like, my life sucks. This is shitty. I got to do all this stuff. But I think the net effect, I don't know, man. You take me 6 months now and then check me in 6 months. I mean, let's go a year. Check me now. Check me in a year. Take away all my money now.
Yeah.
Check me in a year. I would actually probably bet that the no money Dan making some money and having like some kind of a comeback is incrementally happier than the I stay right where I'm at.
Yeah.
And we fast forward a year.
Dude, it's crazy because you actually talk about your time in Hawaii. You're like surfing and you say this thing, you're like, I realized that this hippie in a van could have had the exact same day, and that was pretty cool to me. And you're like saying this is like one of the best days, one of the best periods of your life.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's exactly like, that's totally a downside or downsize from this, you know, like would you be happier if you were out there? And I'm curious, why aren't you in Hawaii right now doing that exact same thing?
I mean, that's the goal. I hope to end up there. I guess like so I brought my friends there. I think if I just flew there, I would have to like make some friends and go through the whole thing. And that's the goal. Like the goal is to retire in Hawaii, or, you know, be in Thailand more, do some of that stuff.
Yeah.
I started free diving. I really like that. There's something that like forces a calm on you, like an ice bath or like diving 100 feet under the ocean or whatever, that just like forces you into like a calm, good, relaxed place.
You said making friends, and it made me actually wonder, what is that like at your level? Because I imagine there's a lot of people that have all these ulterior reasons that you have to wonder, you're like, why are you trying to be my friend? Why are you trying to be connected to me in my life? It could be with romantic partners or across the board, but.
Yeah, I would say like being famous, like being a hot chick. You have like forced interactions. You know what I mean? Like I go out and I have people come up to me and have conversations and ask me for photos and do all this shit, and whether I like it or not, you know, and a hot girl has to go through that same thing. Like she gets hit on going to the mailbox, she gets hit on going to the grocery store, you know what I'm saying? So she has forced interactions too.
Yeah.
So I think when you have forced interactions, it kind of isolates you a little bit, because you have so many people like coming up to you and like wanting your attention or drawing your energy or whatever. And I found the same thing with dating, you know, a bunch of girls, is that you were getting your energy like pulled in a bunch of different directions. So I don't know. I think it's, especially when you're living in a city like LA, it's kind of hard to like find genuine interactions, because so many people are kind of like trying to come up and they see you as like a way to get more famous or a way to, you know, have a better lifestyle or access to women, or, you know, all the things that I represented, which were not necessarily a reason why you'd want somebody to be friends with you, right? So I feel like when I was in LA, it almost became kind of a situation where if somebody couldn't provide me benefit, then I wouldn't even let them in the door. But if I could get benefit from them, then I didn't feel like they could use me, because it was like mutually beneficial. So it was
like
almost like
transactional,
symbiotic, you know, transactional relationships where, you know, if a hot girl wanted to come around, like, okay, like I'm having sex with her, she's living a good life, we both win. A guy coming over who's another celebrity, like he's promoting my brand, he's getting to hang out with hot chicks. We both bring up each other's fame. There's, you know, mutual benefits. So like other rich guys, we go on a vacation, we chop up expenses. So now we both have the same, vacation for half the price, right? So there's like that sort of stuff. And then I think you protect yourself, because then people can't use you if you're getting something from them. So you can kind of like just accept it for what it is. And probably not like the healthiest way to go about, you know, the whole friendship thing. But then you've got like the old school friends, you know, and then it's like, they've been around for a while, so you don't have to like question their intentions, you know. But the flip side of that is then you're kind of like footing the bill, because you're not going to fly commercial, you're not going to stay in a shitty house, you're bringing your chefs, you know, you this and that, right? So it's like you either just bring them along for the ride or you do the vacation an entirely different way or they don't come. Those are your three options. So what you land on is like, I'm going to carry them. I'm going to pay for all this shit. And they're riding on your plane, staying in your house. Your chef is feeding them. You know what I mean? Like all that stuff. And whether you like it or not, it's going to affect the relationship because they're almost like beholden to you. And like, if they're not like treating you with a little bit of deference that they wouldn't otherwise have treated you with 10 years ago, then you almost feel slighted because you know you're like carrying this dude.
Bill,
So it's like it whether you like it or not, it almost like forces a slight change on the relationship, you know, but at least you know that they were there before you had money. So the initial intentions were pure, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
You feel like it's been like that with women as well?
I've had like such a odd approach when it comes to women. You know, if you compare it to like conventional.
Yeah.
I basically got into a pretty serious relationship with a girl and it was kind of like a bit toxic and she ended up kind of like choosing fame over the relationship. And
was that
like,
just a
yeah.
Okay.
And she like, but you know, it was pretty crazy. Like she like tattooed my name above her fucking, you know, whatever. Like, you know, it's just like she was like in it too. And like we were like really in love with each other and having sex all the time. Things were great, but then it was like things were also like really not great too. And I think that relationship almost like sent me over the edge where it was like, okay, if I've got a million women around, like I'm not going to get attached to them. And then, you know, it just keeps it like all at arm's length. And also it made the situation where like you just had to put in so much less effort too. Like I found like how much like competition had an impact on how women reacted to you and like the things that you could get away with if there was competition. Like I actually found that when I was only dating 5 girls, their expectations of me were exponentially higher than if I was dating 50 girls. Because if I'm dating 50 girls, they're just like happy to have the time and the expectation isn't that high and they know they're completely replaceable. And it's like, it is what it is, and you have fun and you enjoy the time when you have it, and you don't have much time, so it's like the time is more precious to them and like the expectation is less, versus when you're dating like 3 or 5 women, now it's almost like they're jockeying for position of like who's more important. They're comparing themselves to the other girls. They're like, oh, you know, why is he hanging out with this girl more? And then, you know, it becomes like a little bit of a different dynamic, which is kind of counterintuitive. You would think that like the better you treated a girl, the more time that you spent with her, the more, you know, the relationship would be better.
Yeah.
But it, you know, I found the opposite to be true. It was like a weird thing. So I guess, I don't know, what I kind of landed on was I think it's like better to have a monogamous relationship, as strange as that is coming from me. Because I think you got 2 choices. You could just like do whatever you want and, you know, be free and like allow the women to be free and just use condoms with all the girls and not care about if they hook up with other guys and it's just like purely sexual and whatever. Or I think you can find a girl that you enjoy spending time with and that you actually trust each other.
Wow.
And I think it's hard to have that. Like I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think it's unlikely to find a woman that is going to be okay with you sleeping with other women that actually cares about you for the right reasons.
Yeah.
It is possible if you find a bisexual, very open, whatever, right? Like I'm not saying it's impossible. It's very unlikely. And I also think that like, even if the girl is okay with it, I think that you like cause internal damage to her. And I found that with Andrea and that didn't feel good to me, even though I could do whatever I wanted. And it was this weird spot where she basically like told me like, you can have sex with other girls, just don't tell me about it. I want you to lie about it. And then she would try and like catch me cheating. And I'm just like, but wait, but you told me to lie. It was this whole weird thing. But then she wouldn't let me break up with her. And she like, you know, like almost, was going to commit suicide one time when I tried to break up with her. So I was in this weird spot and I really liked her and I was like having sex with her, but I didn't want to like be monogamous. So it was like this crazy thing. Cause I was like, I was just becoming famous my whole life. Like I wanted to be a rock star, you know? And so I got this like, you know, moment in time, like, and so she was awesome. She was a great girl. I just like, in my mind, I just didn't want to be in a relationship, which sucked because I like dragged her through this whole thing. And I tried to actually do the right thing. It was my buddy Bill actually saved me and he saved her. He bet me $600,000 that I wouldn't go a year without having sex with her. And she did not make it easy, let me tell you. But the good thing is, like, she actually met a guy, she had kids, she's married, she's like in a good relationship. And I think like it took that, because I wasn't strong enough to do the right thing without the bet.
Yeah.
So God bless him for doing that, because it was the best thing for her, and it was not the right thing for me to do.
Okay.
Even though it was like, felt good to have a girl that would like cut her arm off for you, and sex was awesome, and she was like one of the hottest chicks in the world, you know, and she was just like diehard loyal, and she'd let me do, you know what I mean? It was like, to most people that would be the perfect situation, but like it didn't feel good. You know what I'm saying? Like I knew deep down it like wasn't good for her, but it was like this weird spot where like at the same time, like she kind of didn't want to let me stop, right? Like, so
the monogamy thing, I think people listening probably found that to be very surprising. So just like a little background on that. So like at this point, like how many women have you slept with in your life total?
thousands.
Like Will Chamberlain levels?
Not 20,000. 20,000 is a bit ambitious, but I mean, like I said, I was having sex with 3 girls a day on average, at least at a minimum. I mean, like if I only had sex with 2 girls in a day, that was like, we're having some real off day or something, right?
Yeah.
And some days 4, sometimes, you know, whatever, 5, 7, the most was 9.
Wow.
But I don't know. It was just, it didn't really seem to matter that much.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I had a 9-some with like some, or 10-some, I guess, you count yourself, 10-some. I don't know. It was like, I don't know. They're just like waiting, you know, it's just like having sex with one girl, you know, they're just like waiting. I don't know. It's like, and then there's like a lot of obligation for you. It's like, to have sex with 9 girls. I don't know. Like it just, I had this image in my mind when I was growing up of like how awesome this would be. What I landed on was I actually just would rather have sex with one girl and then, you know, another girl and whatever. I actually like the more one-on-one than the crazy group thing. You know what I mean? So,
Well, so there's this famous quote from Old Chamberlain, which I don't know, you've probably seen it, but he said, with all of you men out there who think that having 1,000 different ladies is pretty cool, I've learned in my life, I found out that having one woman 1,000 different times is much more satisfying. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know if I agree with the 1,000 different ways. I think having one girl that's cool is worth, you know, having a bunch of other, I mean, don't get me wrong. There is a cool dynamic to dating like 4, 3, 2, whatever girls that are cool with each other, and you're going out and, you know, everybody's getting along, and it's like, you know, and you have variety and it's fun. But I enjoyed the best one cool chick, hanging out with my buddies, hang out with your girl at night. Girls could go do girl stuff. Guys could go do guys stuff. I like guy shit. Like I like surfing.
Yeah.
I like, you know, working out. I like doing guy stuff. I don't really like hanging out with a bunch of girls. It's my sex addiction that drove me to do that. Like hanging out with like, I don't know, it sounds cool, but like it's really not that cool. Hanging out with a bunch of girls listening to this stupid shit they talk about all day. Like, and it wasn't probably the most intelligent girls. I mean, they were super hot, but like, I don't know, finding a girl that's super hot and super smart is kind of like a needle in the haystack sort of thing. So I almost solved for just looks. But like I said, I do think that like one cool girl that does stuff with you that you actually have a mental connection with, I think the sex is better. I think you're more relaxed. I think you have less things to deal with, less distractions. Your energy's not being pulled in a bunch of different directions. And then, like I said, then you get to have like normal interactions with your buddies. Like my buddies can't relax when there's 10 girls running around topless and doing crazy shit. Like they're just distracted, right? It's just like they can't help themselves and whatever. They're human beings, you know? So it messed up the dynamic. So I found that like it was hard to have my buddies around and like hang with my buddies versus like when we just had our girls, like they weren't looking at my chick. I wasn't looking at their chick. Our girls were hanging, you know what I mean? Like would play board games, would do whatever, you know, watch movies and smoke weed and just do whatever, you know, people do on vacation, you know? And so I actually liked that dynamic because I could focus on the things that made me happy, which was having intellectual conversations with my buddies, playing cards, you know, at the time smoking weed. I've actually quit smoking weed. But yeah.
One of the things that kind of makes me think about is like some of the themes we're exploring. Like we produce a lot of content on like the mind, the body, and the spirit. And so a lot of these different things overlap with how they might affect you mentally, with what you're doing with your body. And then obviously spirit. And so there's kind of like this interesting figure in your book, which was one of your photographers, Jay Rich. And he wrote that like you guys had late night spiritual conversations. And so what were those?
Well, he was a preacher.
Which is just wild in itself that he ended up like.
Yeah, it's interesting to go from a preacher to a pimp.
Yeah.
Literally. But yeah, no, he had an interesting story. I think we both kind of like knew, like we weren't probably going down the right path. You know, I think what was it? I had a quote. It was, "Pleasure seeking will take you further than you want to go.
Oh, that was on your Twitter.
Cost you more than you're willing to pay, and keep you longer than you're willing to stay."
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought that was like pretty good depiction of it, you know?
Yeah.
Like you kind of know it's probably not the right thing, but it's also hard to stop.
Yeah.
Kind of like drugs.
Yeah.
I think pleasure seeking and drugs have a lot of parallels. I mean, they kind of like, drugs cause the pleasure spikes, right? So I think it makes sense, but
yeah.
You keep saying addiction, and I'm like, do you have this sense of like hope for like a liberation? Because like a lot of people talk about that with addiction. They're like, well, I'm gonna get liberated. I want to get liberated from this thing at some point or another.
No, I beat it. I haven't had sex in like 12 days. Or maybe
right now?
Yeah, 12 days or 13 days, something like that, yeah. But I beat all my addictions. I beat them all when I was writing my book. I like didn't do any drugs other than I smoked weed once and did a quarter tab of acid for like 60 days. Did pretty much no drugs. Didn't have a lot of sex. Well, only with one girl. And I didn't gamble. I basically, like I said, I beat all my addictions during that. Yes, weed was a big one for me. I actually, it's funny because people talk about weed not being addictive. That's bullshit. Weed for me was super addictive.
How so?
I just couldn't. It was just really hard to stop. And I would smoke weed every day. It was almost like I was like, looking at my watch, like, is it time?
Just waiting for it, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it was one of those things where like, man, I really I had a hard time quitting that. I had a hard time quitting weed, and I think that was one of the harder ones to stop. Obviously, the sex addiction was a difficult one.
How are you doing that one? How are you battling the sex addiction?
I'm not surrounding myself with it. I think when it's not around, it's easier. Like if I had a bunch of chicks around here, it would definitely be more difficult.
It's like an alcoholic going to a bar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it's like. And so, yeah, I was the alcoholic that was working at the liquor store, and it was not good. But I think for most guys, it turns into a masturbation addiction because they don't have access to have the sex addiction. You really have to be like a celebrity or something to have a true sex addiction, because having that much sex to where it's actually a problem it just takes a lot of time, dude. Like even
totally.
If you're famous or if you're rich and if you solved for getting girls and you've done all this stuff, it still takes a lot of effort.
Well, that's
just
one of the complications of polyamory is the amount of like logistics that you have to, like, if you're in a relationship in some way, even if there's like a hierarchy to the polyamory,
Yes.
it's like you have like 6 different schedules you have to manage. You run a company. There's like trying to do other things.
It's
like
draining.
Yeah.
Like you have to do like a lot. You have to do like 30 or 50 or 100 or whatever, or you have to, I don't know. In my opinion, I think do one. But like, I really don't like the dynamic of 3 girls. I think it's like guaranteed to cause competition. I don't think the girls are going to be happy. Maybe 2 could work if they were into each other. Maybe, but then, if you're just hanging out with one, the other one's just sitting there. Like, I don't know. I haven't found too many dynamics that were super successful long-term. Short-term I have, but not for any like indefinite period of time.
So would you ever consider marriage or no?
I don't necessarily believe in marriage in the sense of getting the government involved in your business and also like forcing 2 people to be together. Like, I like it in a spiritual sense and I like it in like an idea, but I feel like the actual like results, if half of these people get divorced and then the fallout of that divorce, and how I've seen some of these divorces get so ugly versus when two people just choose to be together and they don't have to be there. I feel like they both behave better. They both try harder. And I think the problem with a lot of relationships is that one person is not willing to walk. And when you're not willing to walk, you will put up with the maximum amount of shit the other person is willing to give you. And then that other person will slowly lose respect for you over time. So I find the best relationship is one when you don't need the other person and they don't need you, but you both enjoy spending time together and you choose to spend time, not because you have to, but because you want to.
Yeah.
And so I think like in order to get into a good place for a good relationship, I think you have to be okay being alone. And I think when you come from a place of like not needing, this is true of a lot of things. Like girls don't want to, hook up with you when you're desperate. Banks don't want to loan you money when you need it.
Yeah.
People don't, you know what I'm saying? Like people don't want to give you something when you need it. So I think just from a subconscious standpoint, entering into a relationship not needing anything, it gives you the ability to like be there for the right reasons. And I think a lot of people also choose a partner based out of like, oh, this person wants me and it's like masturbate or be with this person versus like I have a bunch of options and I choose you.
Yeah.
And that's how I want to enter into a relationship with a girl. Is like I could have all these girls and I'm picking you.
Yeah.
Versus, okay, you're the only chick that wants me, come on. And I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of people like settle, or they get into a relationship because they need attention or because they're lonely or whatever. And I think when you do it because you feel like that's the right person and you just enjoy spending time with them,
Yeah.
that's better. I also
Have you studied attachment theory at all?
have not.
So like attachment theory is one of like the biggest discoveries in psychology in the 20th century. And in the early 1950s, this dude named John Bowlby. And basically what was discovered is that humans have primarily 3 attachment styles to other humans. And it's like this kind of innate longing for connection out of the womb. And initially that's like with your parents. But then you then attach to romantic figures. And so there's like 3 different attachment styles. One is secure, the other one is anxious, and the other one's avoidant. And so
What is the last one?
avoidant. And so
Okay.
so the anxious person is like someone's running away from them, and then they're like running after them and they're like, no, like don't leave me. And then they and women often will give sex because they're worried about that person. And then the avoidant person is kind of like detaches and is like, I don't need this at all. And they kind of walk away from that standpoint. But I mean, it's kind of like an underpinning of like our biology in terms of the longing for attachment. Do you feel like you long for that, like in relationships with women?
I would say I'm more in the detached category. Maybe that's like a defense mechanism from some like bad relationships or like fear of, being hurt or whatever. Because I think with Jessa, I think when she chose like her career and fame because she didn't feel secure in the relationship, I took that as like she was choosing like fame over me. And so my answer to that was to like go Gatsby her and just become super famous in the city that she wanted to move to. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of funny, but not. I guess I would say I would probably be more detached. I've certainly had enough abilities to like get into relationships, and I usually kind of like keep it at arm's length. I also feel like I almost by default have solved for like less relationship girls versus, you know what I'm saying, girls that I would date. Just because of like my persona and the setup that I attract. Basically what I had was like this constant pipeline of hot girls coming in and then competing for me. And I feel like the girl that I probably want to date would not want to, put up with that, or like, you know what I'm saying? Like wouldn't get into that like pipeline in the first place.
Well, what's the girl that you would like to date?
Well, somebody that, was more intellectually stimulating. And I'm also in this trap too, where I feel like I would rather have an older woman because I'll give you an example. I met Jewel, and she's probably going to hate me saying this, but I met her when I was on Necker Island, and I was with like some 19-year-old model girl or whatever. And I remember having a conversation with Jewel, and we like really connected. I had a great conversation with her, and I was like, shit. Like after I talked to her, I like told my buddy, I was like, man, like I think I'm gonna have to break up with my girlfriend. You know what I mean? Like, cause it was just like such a eye-opening of like what is possible with a woman, you know? And yeah, so I think it's tough for me too, because I have such a high standard of what I'm attracted to, and I've like programmed myself to be attracted to just like only this super hot girl. And so finding that, I mean, it's almost like I've guaranteed myself like no chance of actual, you know, dating the right woman, because I'm solving already for probably the wrong type of woman. And then also my standard of what I think is good looking is so high, and it's also skewed more towards like a younger woman, because most women are at their physical prime, you know, in their early 20s. But then at that point, they don't have enough life experience to intellectually stimulate me. You know what I mean? Like, it's so hard for me. I was dating this girl the other day, and she fucking didn't know who Mel Gibson was. And it's just like, man, like the fact that I have to like explain this, you know, or like it would just be a decade of just a lack of information. And then COVID compounded it too, right? Because they just lost 3 of their like most formative years to just like basically like being in solitary confinement or whatever, 2 years, you know, whatever it was, right? And also just social media, just the whole thing. So I think, yeah, it might be a lot.
Do you think that you
forever.
run the risk of like another form of false summit with this? Because I was thinking that of myself in this. I was like, because I'm dating right now, and I'm running into a lot of the same issues that you're talking about. I've tried
What do you
dating
mean?
older women, and because I theoretically was like, oh, you know what I need? I need to prioritize maturity. I need to get somebody who's like just way ahead of me. And then I was like, wait a minute, I'm a decade away from them now, and they're saying references I don't know. And I was doing that with earlier girls, but and you're like, okay, attraction, maturity, and there's all these different aspects. But even when I would get with a girl, I would get into a relationship with a girl that I really wanted to be in relationship with, and you discover this thing about them, or many different things, and it's kind of like an ick, you know, like it's like this thing that you're like, that just drives me nuts now. And that girl didn't do that. Or I can imagine very easily a girl that doesn't do that thing.
Yeah, you shallow out yourself. It's like this super hot chick, but her big toe is too long or something.
You kind of create another summit, you know?
Well, that's probably like an internal like defense mechanism to not allow yourself to get too attached. That's probably something you got to dig a little bit deeper and figure out what that is, because it's probably coming from a place of like fear of, you know, being attached to a girl that then leaves, or there's some thing that's causing you to like
we talked about attachment
self-sabotage
styles, and that's why that is a really cool thing.
You wrote, well, this was about in the context about poker, but you said people aren't robots and they can't just turn their emotions on and off like a light switch. And I mean, you were sitting, that was in context of poker, and you're sitting at the table, but like, do you feel like that's also true for relationships?
Yeah, I think women are pretty good actresses though. Yeah. And so I think people can fake things for a long time if the objective is big enough. You know what I mean? Like I've seen a lot of girls in relationships with guys that like, they're there for the money, but they're playing that part, you know, and they're in that part. But I don't know, back to your point though, I do think that that's an interesting conundrum to be in, of kind of like that age gap, and it only gets worse as you get older, because then you even have a further gap. And like, how do you solve for that? It's an interesting problem, you know, and I don't know what the answer is to it.
Yeah.
Well, I want to be mindful of time. Kind of last question I had is like, you've been on this like whole journey. So like, what would you say is the whole meaning of all of this?
Well, actually, before I answer that, ask me that in 1 second, because there is one thing that I wanted to say with respect to the other topic, and one thing that I've found is that if you find a girl when she's in her prime, even as she ages, I find that you will remember her as she was and be more attracted to her than you should be, maybe. And I've found that with like girls that I remembered as being super hot, in my mind, they still were hotter than they were because I remembered them, you know what I'm saying, back then. So like, I think if you find a girl when you're younger, as she gets older, you'll still remember her being the hot version of herself. So I think there is hope to like the longer term monogamy and like staying attracted to the woman, as long as you can just like remember her as she was when you like, you know, first was super attracted to her.
There's something really beautiful about like history, you know, to like, and I think that's also kind of at the core of a lot of monogamy, is like sharing life, being like side by side with somebody, being witnessing like that somebody saw you while you were younger. There is something insanely attractive to me in that, like being seen and having my story be witnessed, not just in the tabloid sense, but in the sense of like, you were there in the most boring, average moment of my existence.
Yeah.
You still are here. And, you know, like, I don't know, man. I mean, part of me feels like if I was in your position, like I would have that longing, like to not just to have these people coming up and liking me because something exterior, liking something deeply like human and just me, you know, in those ordinary moments.
Yeah, I think fame is isolating. Jewel said that being famous is like the Lonely Hearts Club. That's what she called it.
Wow.
I think that's one of the reasons I connected with her is I think we both had experience of that. Like she was super, super famous at her peak, like one of the most famous singers, you know? And so she had to deal with a lot of that stuff. And I had been, you know, going through it for a while. And so it was just kind of like one of the few times that I connected with somebody about that, because I didn't really like hang out with that many famous women because I found that they were just more of a hassle and they like, I don't know, they just kind of more selfish, expected this, expected that. And I always preferred like, you know, girls that were more grateful and more genuine. So I kind of like stayed away from the famous girls, but with her, yeah, we had a really good conversation. It was just, like I said, eye-opening for me to like learn something from a woman and have her be like, you know, super intelligent and be able to like have good conversation. I hadn't done that for a while. So it was like, I hadn't done that with the guys, but you know, I don't know. Like I said, I was just like kind of solving for looks. And that was not the most.
I mean, the fame thing is like, I mean, we talked about the wealth of women, but like the fame thing is like its own mountain. And I feel like I've heard that from a lot of famous people, like, you know, in terms of things being transactional, it's like when you get to a certain level of status and you start questioning like why people are trying to connect with you and if it's meaningful, and it must make you even more wary of like, even with the connection point with women, like.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, yeah, it's always kind of like in the back of your mind because it's not something that, you know, like even a rich guy can like show up in a Pinto, you know what I mean? Or like not talk about it or whatever, but like kind of like can't turn off fame if you're with a girl and you're like out at a coffee shop and a bunch of motherfuckers are like coming up to you, you know, and it's like you can't turn that off. So it's something that you're like constantly having to, and I don't go out that much. So for me, it's whatever. I don't even care that much, but it is definitely an impediment to like normal human interactions. Like that's another thing too, is like the anxiety. Like a lot of people like come up with a lot of anxiety. So you have to deal with that. And that makes them just like less comfortable conversations because they are like thinking about what to say, or they're super
coming
nervous.
up to you with anxiety?
Yeah, they're like super nervous about what to say. You know what I'm saying? And, like you don't want them to have like a bad experience, but at the same time, like when somebody comes up, I'm like, oh man, you're fucking awesome. You're the man. Like I want to have a life like yours, where I've been following you for a while. It's like, what do you say? You know what I mean? Like, cool, man. You know what I mean? Like, where do you go from there? It's kind of like, it's just this, and then it kind of like stops, and then they like try and think of something to say, and it's like you're just having the same conversation with different people that is just not really going anywhere, and you're kind of like rushing to get out of there, and you know what I mean? It's just, totally. I would rather have like natural interactions with a guy, you know, like, and I don't view myself as being much different than, you know, I think I'm probably smart. Well, I know I'm smarter than the average person, but aside from that, like gone through some shit, whatever, like I've definitely had more experiences, but I don't necessarily like think of myself as like being better than a lot of other people. So for me, when somebody treats me like, you know, I don't know, in this like, you know, way of like, oh, you know, you like this non-mortal,
you.
Yeah, exactly. Like when they look at you like a god or something, or like, you know, put you on a pedestal, and you don't view yourself like that, then it's like, it kind of like starts it off as like kind of a strange interaction.
It kind of makes you a foreigner, an alien to them. And you're like, I'm more like you than you realize.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, you know, you feel like a disconnect. And so instead of like, I think humans like have a natural connection to each other, and I think that's, you know, one of the reasons why it's like, you know, it makes you feel good to make somebody else happy. You have that natural human connection, and I think when they don't view you as being like a human, they look at you like you know, celebrity or whatever, it's just like it breaks that normal human connection, and then you don't have that normal interaction like you normally would, then I feel like I said, it isolates you by default, right?
Yeah.
It's so interesting because like we distinguish ourselves on purpose only to have this kind of isolation from the distinction. It's such a horrible.
I have created this shitty bed that I have to sleep in, and I have made peace with it. But yes, it's funny when
Would you do it again?
I don't
would
know.
you do it again?
I think so, because I think I have learned so much, and I think so many of these things I wouldn't realize aren't the answer for not having it. You know what I'm saying? Like, people could have told me this stuff, but I think you only really learn it when you get it.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Why do you
Could I have spent more time doing things that made me happy and whatever? Yes, for sure. But I don't know that I would trade a lot of my experiences for a more mundane life. I've always been one of these people that likes the big roller coaster. So
Yeah. Why do you think that people think it's the answer?
because it's difficult to attain. Like, people put value in things that are difficult to achieve. Like, it was hard for me to get women. So by default, I felt like getting a bunch of women was winning, and it's hard to make money. Everybody wants to make money. Everybody fights to make money. So when you make a lot of money, you feel some degree of success, and then people treat you differently. You get respect, to listen to bullshit. People can't tell you what to do. You have freedoms, like you don't have to go through airport security. You don't have to wear a mask. You don't have some stupid professor telling you to do this or do that or talking down to you. Or that was a big thing for me, is like nobody could talk down to me. When I was in college, that's actually like that was my last day of college, was when I told my professor to go fuck himself, and like, because he was talking down to me, and I was just like, you're not going to talk down to me. Like, who are you? And it's like, I made like $100,000 that week, and I'm just like looking at this guy like, I made more this week than you made in the last 3 years. You're not going to talk down to me. Like, I've been in the military. I've done shit. Like, what have you done? You've read some books. Like, you are here.
Yeah.
I am above you. I know that.
Yeah.
I may not be the greatest, but I know I'm better than you. I've done more than you. I've accomplished more than you. And I don't talk down to you, so you're not going to talk down to me. And I think having that like actual confidence coming from like a place of previous insecurity felt good, because it's one thing to like act cocky. It's another thing to like know that you have accomplished things that you have set out to do. And that's where you get real confidence from. Not to say that I'm like the most confident guy in the world, or at the time I was, but I was certainly a lot more confident than I was before that. Right. So I think like it's a perspective of wherever you start versus where you're at. And so you start at the bottom and you get to here, you're feeling pretty good. If you started here and you come to here, you're not feeling so good. You're at the same place, but it depends on where you start, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's important.
But I think that also gets into the area of like, what's a meaningful pursuit and what's like a meaningless pursuit. I think like some people might pursue fame just to pursue fame just so they can be famous.
Well, I think they understand that it's access, and they like how other people treat them. I think that's another thing, is like people like to be treated well. And I think with fame comes respect, and it comes admiration.
Yeah.
And I think initially it feels good to have a bunch of people like tell you how great you are and whatever. Eventually you get to a place where you really don't care. Like, you actually don't care if people tell you you're great or tell you you're a scumbag or whatever, because like, it's like you've heard it all, and you know that you're not, the greatest, and you're also not the worst. And then you come to a place of like actual confidence in yourself, where it's like, you can say whatever you want. I know that I've done this, this, and this, and I've accomplished things that I've set out to. They may not have been the best goals, and they may not have been the right pursuits, but I did achieve what I wanted to achieve. Right or not, I achieved it. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, and I think a lot of people don't achieve the things that they want to achieve.
Yeah.
So I think, look, at the end of the day, you can only judge yourself by the games that you play, right? So if you never run a race, then, you're never going to be a great sprinter. But, so, and who cares, right? You don't have to be. But if your whole life, that's been a focal point, or you're really slow as a kid and you never get to be fast, then you may look at that as a perceived lack, or you may not have that confidence because you never achieved something that you felt like, you were bad at. So for me, I, did a lot of things that I wasn't good at. And so I was pretty happy about that. Like I said, I probably chased the wrong objectives, but.
It's interesting. One of the things I found myself appreciating so much reading your book was your honesty. And we may not have like complete overlap in most senses. My experience in life is unlike yours in so many regards. But I appreciated your honesty, and I think there's so much value in it for everybody out there, because you said you have explored so many things and you do have so many notes. And I think being genuine and having honesty is probably one of the only criteria that we have. Like, you know,
It's the rarest thing.
yeah.
Like in a relationship, people always ask me like, what's the most important thing? And I always say honesty. Like that has to be the start, you know, like, and it's difficult. Like honesty, I think is the hardest thing in the world because it's so much easier to just say what's comfortable. And I think that you build trust so fast when you're honest. When you ask somebody a question, they tell you something that they know you don't want to hear, but it's the truth. I'm not proud of it, but this is what it is. Like you get enough of that, and then it's like you have to be able to trust that person because you know they're not telling you something that's convenient for themselves. And I think there's a lot of people that fancy themselves as being honest, but when push comes to shove and something is uncomfortable, they lie, and it's a very slippery slope. You're either honest all the time or you're not honest.
Yeah,
it's like, you know, it's like if you're not honest when it's, you know, yeah, it's really uncomfortable and it sucks, you know, and if somebody asks you to be hooked up with another girl and you don't want to tell that girl and you know it's going to hurt her feelings and whatever, you can rationalize. But, you know, the truth is the truth, man. Like, you know, so it is what it is. And you can, you know, either be honest or you can, you know, do what's convenient. And I think, like I said, most people do what is convenient.
I have this buddy who got pretty big in the surf world, and he became a professional surfer at one point. And he was hitting this, you'll love this because I know you surf, but he was hitting this amazing set. And he comes off of the set, he goes underneath the water, and he comes back up, and he has this epiphany, this clarity moment. And he realizes he's never loved surfing once in his life. He's really good at it, gotten him all the attention, all the clarity, all the love ever, you know, but for all these inauthentic reasons. And he realizes in that moment that what he really wanted to do is he really wanted to get into gardening, but he just felt too ashamed about it. You know?
That's a funny epiphany to have. I wonder what he was on at the time.
And he did. He got into gardening, and he hangs out with a fair number of old ladies now. And
really?
That's what he
awesome.
loves, and he's really into it. But I wonder sometimes, like, what we do in this sacrifice of honesty, authenticity of ourselves, you know, at times, like, I think one of the most difficult journeys is that, like, fiscally, there's these paths that make money. They get you famous, all these different things. But that road is only this big. And sometimes what we want to explore is, like, way out here, you know what I mean? And we sacrifice a lot of that authentic journey, I think sometimes. Have you found things like that about yourself, like coming up out of the water moment?
I've definitely had some epiphanies. One of them was I was on mushrooms and I was with a bunch of girls in Antigua and I was on a paddleboard. And I remember they were all just like trying to get my attention, and I just paddled out to sea, and I just wanted to be away from them, and I didn't want my energy to be sucked away from anything. And that was when I was like thinking about kind of like, man, like I've gotten to the end of this road and it's not making me happy. Like, what do I do? And then I had like this thing where it's like, yeah, but you have Ignite and you've got this brand and you keep doing it. And it's like you have this thing of kind of like almost getting there in life and then kind of bailing out at the last minute. And so I had this like pull. For me, one of my goals is I want to become a billionaire, and then I want to never like think or focus on money ever again. It's like kind of like the last hill that I want to climb. I don't know, maybe it's not a worthy hill to climb, but I feel like if I did, then I could just kind of like shelve that thing. And I feel like for my whole life, money's been such a driver, and I don't want it to be a driver anymore because I know that it doesn't kind of like bring me happiness. It's kind of this like weird thing where it's like I want more money to be done with money. You know, I guess I should probably just.
How is that any different than the whole, if someone feels like they make $1 million, then they feel
it's not. That's the thing. Like like I have always, it's always been like this thing. I remember like it was like 1 million, then it was 5 million, then it was 10, then it was 50. It was like always this thing.
Well, why don't you stop? Why don't you stop where you're at?
I don't know. I just feel like I want, and it's not even that I want the money. It's not even like, oh, I want to buy a bigger house or bigger plane or any of that shit. Like I almost just like want to give it away, like give a bunch of it away. I don't even care. Like it's just, I just kind of want to like get to the top of the mountain, I guess. It's a weird thing. Maybe it's just something that I got to kind of like come to peace with. I don't know. I feel like I can do it. I don't know.
My friend, he's a big mountaineer, and it kind of parallels a little bit of what you're saying. And he talks about like going up and peaking and literally going to the top of these mountains all the time. And lately, he's had these moments where he's become a little bit more sensitive to the rest of nature, like plants and waterfalls and these kinds of things. And he told me this story. I was like, he was gearing up for this huge ascent. And it was a moment I was like super proud of him. And he was like, dude, it's going to be like the craziest thing ever. And I'm going to go up this thing. And he gets back. I'm like, dude, that was the fastest ascent I've ever heard of in my life. He's like, yeah, I saw this flower. And then I just sat and I looked at that flower and it was what I needed. It was the view I wanted. And to me, I was like, I had so much admiration because I realized, I was like, well, hang on a second. He got to his view. He got to that point. He was able to turn back and recognize. He was so attuned his whole journey to the top of the mountain that he was able to recognize, oh, I was meant to come here for the flower. And then he didn't have to go to the top of the mountain anymore. And I had so much admiration for that journey because I was like, recognizing enough is probably the hardest thing that we do in our lives. It's probably the hardest thing to define because it's always a shifting thing. And in that moment, he had gone for the mountaintop and he discovered it was just this silly flower, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think climbing mountains, it's never really about getting to the top. You know, it's kind of like about proving something to yourself or going through something that's hard or like, I don't know. It's never really about like getting to the peak. You think it is, but I think that's true of a lot of things in life. And I think it's more about like conquering something. And so, yeah, maybe he realized like, didn't matter if you got to the top of the mountain or not, you know? And in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't. Like, does it really matter if you get to the top of the mountain, if you found what you were looking for?
Yeah.
Is it really money that you're like looking for?
I don't know, man. I think it is. Like, I think that's the top of the mountain. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'll find a flower. Who knows?
I hope you find your flower, Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really do, man.